Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our annual employer training. Our format today is going to be more of a panel discussion than what we've done in previous years. For those of you who have attended these in the past, you're used to seeing one person standing at a podium delivering a presentation. Today we're going to do more of a panel style. My name is Jeff George. I'll be your, I guess, more or less your moderator today. I've been with TRSL since 2006. Started working in the retirement department before switching over to the Employer Services Department in 2014. To my left is Kelly Resnick. Like to say hello, introduce yourself.
Hi, again, my name is Kelly Resnick. I've been with Teachers Retirement a little over 11 years. I started out in the retirement department working in several sections, and now I'm the Employer Services trainer.
And to my right is Sharon Lashney.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Sharon Lashney. I'm currently the supervisor for the Employer Audit section here in the Employer Services Department. I've been with teachers over 25 years. I've previously worked in various departments, and right before I became supervisor of this particular section, I was the previous employer trainer.
Okay. Just a few housekeeping items. We're going to have a couple of 10-minute breaks scheduled during the presentation. I encourage you to ask questions. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom panel. You can type your questions in there, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. If they're relevant to the topic that we're discussing, we'll try to answer them as they come in. Some of them maybe we'll wait till the end of that topic. I just want to say that we can't answer questions about specific individuals. If you have a question about a specific file, that would be better addressed via a phone call or an email. Also, we're going to be sending out a survey email tomorrow. Please take a few minutes to fill out that survey, give us some feedback, let you know what you think about the training. We'll also be sending out certificates. That probably won't be until next week, though. If you have any technical difficulties at any point during the presentation, I just recommend hitting F5 to refresh the feed, and that usually takes care of it. While we were kind of putting this together and looking at the number of registrations that were coming in, I was a little bit surprised by the number for state agencies. This is usually our lightest day. We do a presentation for our K-12 employers, our higher ed employers, and our state agencies. And historically, state agencies has always been the lowest attended day. But today it's, we've got
74 strong.
Yeah, we've got 74 people participating right now. Usually we have around 20 or 25. So I just want to, start by saying that this is really geared towards people that have people enrolled in TRSL, for people that are responsible for reporting those people to us, certifying a service credit, submitting corrections, people that have TRSL related duties. So because there's kind of an unexpectedly high number of people that are registered, I don't know if all of you have hands-on TRSL duties. If you don't have anybody currently in TRSL, a lot of this might not be relevant to you, but just hang on it and see how much of it you want to attend. Once we get through the part about enrolling people by submitting a 2R, if you don't already have anybody in TRSL, the rest of it might not be relevant. So I just wanted to kind of get that out before we started.
Right.
So the things that we're going to talk about today, we're going to give a brief overview of EMIS, our employer membership information site. Talk about TRSL eligibility enrollments. We'll talk about the ORP, the optional retirement plan, then the monthly contribution salary reporting, service credit certification corrections, and finally the retirement process. So we're going to start with the very beginning, Index 0 and Index 1. But really, when we talk about state agencies, I think a good place to start is just kind of a general comparison of TRSL versus lasers, because we recognize that you're used to dealing with lasers. Many state agencies might only have a handful of people in TRSL, so you don't get that repetition of dealing with us over and over. So let's kind of go through some of the differences. So starting off, everybody has an agency number. For TRSL, we assign that agency number. For lasers, That's based on a DOA number. So right off the bat, the numbers, kind of your name, we kind of use a number as a name. Your number is different.
Right.
That's something you got to kind of be aware of.
And I think the numbers for the lasers agencies usually starts with a 9. The TRSL agency numbers always starts with a 0, and it's a 4-digit number.
Right. Yep. One thing that perhaps we're a little bit less complicated than lasers is our contribution rate. The employer contribution rate for us is the same as our for lasers. It's the same as our K-12 employer rate. There's one rate. Lasers has multiple rates for different sub plans. So that's one, I guess, put that in the check column for us. We have one rate that you have to be aware of. We operate on a fiscal year basis. We run from July 1st to June 30th, where lasers operates on a calendar year basis. So that's a difference. Also, our system does not interface with LeGov where lasers does. So just because you do a termination in LeGov doesn't mean they're terminated in EMIS. Any action you take in LeGov, you have to also take in EMIS. So that's a pretty big difference. So a good thing is you have a dedicated person here at TRSL that is assigned to you. For most of the state agencies, that contact person is going to be Quincy as a JOFO. See, her contact information is here. But if you go to our website, trsl.org, there's an employers section of that.
Right.
There's a place where you can enter your agency number and pull up who your liaison is. And it's got all of our contact information for everybody in the Employer Services Department. So I guess what we're trying to let you know is that, hey, we're here. We recognize that you might not be as familiar with TRSL. Call us and we can help you.
Yeah, and I just want to add the phone numbers that you see here, including the phone number for Quincia, that's our direct number. So you're not going to be talking to an automated line. You're going to get us.
Right. That's the phone on our desks.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Let's talk about our employer procedures manual, because that's a really great resource. Kelly, you want to just let them know about our manual?
Right. If you go to our website, you click on the Employers tab, the Employer Procedures Manual is listed there. It walks you through everything that you need to do. It starts out with an intro to TRSL, and then 0.0 is how to navigate our EMA site. And then there's 18 other indices. And each index, can be a little big, but keep in mind there's a table of contents in each index. And you're able to search and navigate through there by either clicking on Control F to search a particular word. But it's basically a reference manual. You don't need to know every bit of it, but if you're looking for a specific situation, you can find it.
Yeah, it's a really great resource, and
It is.
if you're not already familiar with it, it's easy to use.
Right.
Like you said, it's searchable. We don't have all this TRSL knowledge in our head at all times, so we refer to the
Right.
manual ourselves a lot.
Yeah.
It's just a great resource.
And our training today is totally coming from our Employer Procedures Manual.
So EMIS, that's an acronym for our Employer Membership Information Site. This is basically where you're going to go to do anything TRSL related. It's where you're going to view member records, update member records, certify employee data to us. This is where you can upload files and reports. Now, we know that for most state agencies that we deal with, OSIP is sending in that monthly salary contribution file and your sick leave file. So they're going to be the ones typically submitting that to us. So you're not going to be submitting files as much as an individual agency, because most of that's handled for you by OSIP. But there are reports that you can view, and we'll go over some of those reports a little bit later. But let's just take them through some of the screens that they're going to be working with
Right.
in EMIS. So the member summary screen is always a good screen to start on, right?
Right. It's a good screen to start on. You can type in the member's social security number and it's going to populate and it's going to tell you their basic information, what their status is, whether they're active or working after a drop, whatever. And then it's going to tell you what plan they're in, what their date of service accrual is, and their account history, what employers they've worked with previously, whether they're active or inactive, and their service credit and service credit for eligibility.
Yeah, this is important for state agencies because they're going to be enrolling people or submitting retained membership forms for people. They have to make sure that they're actually eligible.
Right.
So they have to have that 5 years of service credit. So you're going to look on the member summary screen. There's a field on there called service credit for eligibility. That's going to tell you how much service credit they have, and you want to make sure that they have those 5 years to be eligible to retain membership.
Right. And you want to make sure that you're looking in that slim tan bar. That's the eligibility, because sometimes the service credit may be a little different.
Another screen they're going to be looking at a lot is the account history. I'm going to kind of give them a quick tour of that screen.
Yeah, our account history, it is laid out on a fiscal year basis, each year ending with June 30th. And it displays how we are calculating that person's service credit, how much service credit that person has on a fiscal year by year basis. And it shows how much earnings was reported for that employee, for that member, how much contributions, and it gives a total of the service credit and total of their contributions.
Yeah, and you can navigate to these different screens. On the left-hand column in EMIS, there's a members column. And that's where you can see member summary, account history, all the various screens you can navigate to.
Right.
Now, this screen is very important.
Right.
Where Sharon was talking about the account history, which showed closed fiscal years. This screen is going to give you a summary of the current fiscal year, right?
Right. You can go under the members tab and you can click on monthly salary and contribution screen. Like Jeff said, this is a monthly breakdown. And even on the account history, you can actually click on the fiscal year and then it'll give you a monthly breakdown. But once that year closes out, that screen is frozen and you're no longer able to update anything monthly. You have to update it yearly. And we'll talk about that later. But when you click on the monthly salary and contribution screen in the current fiscal year, you're able to do, you're able to look at the earnings and correct the earnings. And there's expectant codes, which is either a 3 or a 4 or a 0. A 3 means money has to be reported. They're enrolled that month and they have to be reported. 4 means you can report money or not. It doesn't matter. For example, it might be the month that you enroll someone. Maybe you enroll somebody in July. Earnings are, if you report earnings or not, that's fine. And a 0 means no earnings can be reported.
Right, and that all ties into the contribution exception report, which we'll get into a little bit later. But just keep the screen in mind, because when you're looking at that contribution exception report, trying to clear exceptions, it's good to go to this screen to see, okay, what was TRSL expecting to be reported, and then what was actually reported. That's going to tell you what the exception is and kind of help you know how to clear it. Right. So we'll get into more detail on that later, but I'll say just keep this screen in mind. Now you're going to see when you're in EMIS navigating from screen to screen, you're going to see a system code. For state agencies, they're only going to see 4 or 6.
Right.
4 is the TRSL regular plan. That's our defined benefit plan. System 6, that designates that somebody is in the ORP, the optional retirement plan. Now, I mentioned in EMIS, there's various reports you can pull. We're not going to go through every one of them, but there's that reports tab in EMIS. If you put your mouse on that and click, you're going to see all the various reports that are available. So we're going to go through some of them that employers might not know about, or ones that we think can make their job a little bit easier. So we'll start with the enrolled not reported report, and all of these reports, the name tells you really exactly what it is.
Right.
There's no mystery here. This is going to give you a list of people that are enrolled in TRSL but are not being reported. Can you want to tell them why this would be useful, when they might want to pull it?
Right. So it's very useful report. You want to pull it, you can pull it monthly. When you're pulling this report, you're going to have to put in the system code 4, and then you're going to put in the month and the fiscal year that you're looking at. And if someone is enrolled in a particular month, earnings have to be reported, whether they're on leave without pay or any reason, they have to have earnings reported. And so a good indication that somebody, if you pull this report and somebody's on it and there's no earnings reported, either they were on leave without pay and you didn't report anything, probably 80% of this is when someone just needs to be terminated. So if you're pulling this report and a lot of people are listed on there and they're no longer working for you, it's probably they just need to be terminated.
Right, and this ties back into that screen we're looking at. We've got that monthly contribution screen with the expecting codes, the 3s, 4s, and 0s.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody had the expecting code of 3, that means they're enrolled and we're expecting earnings and contributions to be reported for them. If no contributions or earnings are reported for them, they're going to show up on this enrolled, not reported.
Right.
Now, as state agencies, when we talked earlier about EMIS not interfacing with LaGov,
right,
I think it can be easy for some of these state agencies to terminate somebody in LaGov, forget they have to do it in EMIS.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to keep showing up as enrolled, not reported, because you may have terminated in your system, but in our system, they're still active. So we're still expecting earnings and contributions.
Yeah.
So that's an easy thing to happen.
Right.
Always make sure that if you terminate somebody in LaGov, terminate them in our system as well.
Yeah.
The next report is kind of a sister report to that. Reporting not enrolled. Again, title tells you exactly what it is. Sharon, you want to tell them maybe why this report would be useful and when they should pull it?
And to pull this report, you'll put in the system code 4 and the current fiscal year, which right now we're in fiscal year 2025. And it's going to list everyone who currently has earnings and contributions reported from your agency, but in which TRSL does not have a corresponding enrollment for them, a retaining membership enrollment. So this will help you stay on top of someone. Maybe you've recently had a new hire who previously had TRSL service time more than 5 years. They want to stay in teachers' retirement system. You do everything you have to do to set them up on payroll in your side, in your LaGov site and through OSIP. But if they are going to stay with TRSL, there has to be a corresponding enrollment on our end.
Right. So this could be a timing issue where
Yes.
maybe the 2 R's in the mail, we haven't
Yes.
received it yet, but they've already started reporting contributions. But it's a good way to let you know, hey, these people are being reported to TRSL, but the 2 R's not here, or 2 R's have been submitted.
Now, the other issue would be someone was reported to TRSL in error.
Right.
There might be someone who isn't eligible to stay with TRSL. They're not eligible to retain membership. Or, when they change jobs to your agency, even though they had previous TRSL service, they're electing to join lasers instead of TRSL. That's up to that employee. So you want to make sure if earnings are reported to us that was done correctly.
And I see we have a question. Somebody asked, if somebody should be enrolled and they're on leave without pay, are the full-time earnings still reported for that month? And the answer is yes.
Yes. And we'll go over a little bit what full-time earnings is for a lot of the attendees attending today may not be very familiar with teachers' retirement system and some of our terminology, but we will talk about what full-time earnings are in future slides.
Now, another report that is pretty useful is this ending drop participation. This tells you what month somebody's scheduled to come out of drop. You want to talk about this report?
Right. This report is a real important report. You want to pull it. You can pull it monthly. You can pull it for future dates, past dates. You'll be putting in the month and the year. It's very important that you're pulling this report so you know when someone is coming out of drop. so that you can turn those contributions on in a timely manner. It's better to turn them on as soon as it's relevant, so that you're not having to go back months later and collect contributions, past contributions that the member should have been paying.
Right. We see that from time to time where somebody comes out a drop and contributions aren't turned back on.
Right.
And a couple of months go by, and now the employer has to get those contributions from that member.
Right.
So it's important to stay on top of this, know who's in drop and when they're coming out, so that you can get that, and avoid having to ask for money back for somebody.
Right.
Now we have a similar report to that that's going to tell you who in your agency is eligible to retire. And Sharon, I know that you like this report.
Well, especially for our larger agencies who have, over 100 covered employees. I know some of our audience today, you might have just one or two people covered in teachers. We might have a couple of state agencies that might have, maybe 10 or more. I would say this report is more useful if you have somebody, if any of your covered TRSL employees are currently in drop. This report is very useful because it'll show you their drop participation dates all in that one report. You don't have to query 1 month at a time like the other report. Also, if you have more than 10 people covered under teachers, you might find this report very useful too.
Yep. And this last report that we're going to talk about is actually a new report. Those other 4 have been around for years and years, but this one is new. It deals with ORP, people that are in ORP that have the option to leave ORP and rejoin or join TRSL.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a kind of a relatively new development. In the past, once somebody was in ORP, they were in ORP forever. There was no way out. A law was passed last summer, creating an out for 2 different groups of people. People that have a 1-year window, people that have a 5-year window. This report allows you to identify any of your employees who are currently in ORP and are eligible to join TRSL. Now, we sent letters to all of our K-12 employers and our state agencies that have people in ORP that are in that 1-year window that are eligible to join TRSL. I guess an important note about those people in the 1-year window is that window expires on June 30th, 2025, which is just a few months from now. So when I sent these letters out for state agencies, many of you only had maybe 1 or 2 people, so it wasn't a long list for each agency. But it's important to pull this report, see which of your employees are eligible, and contact them and see if that's something they would want to do. Again, this report, you can pull it by people that have a 1-year window, people that have a 5-year window, both windows, who's eligible, people that are approaching the close of their window. Just want to kind of go over this because it is a new report. Now, we've been talking about EMIS. It's just important to know how to get access to EMIS.
Right.
If you don't already have access to it, how do you get it? Well, there's a form for that. Form 1 is located on our website under the form section. Not inside of EMIS, just on our basic website, TRSL.org, under forms. This is the form that you would use to tell us who at your agency should have access to different programs within EMIS. Now, a couple things about this form. You have to submit the original form to us. We can't accept copies, faxes, scans, emails, electronic signatures. It has to be signed by the agency head or agency head designee. You can also use this form to remove access from people. So if you have somebody that was at your agency who left, you need to take away their access, you would use this form for that as well. There's a section with check boxes for really each program within EMIS. So this is where you would say who has, who you're going to give access to different programs. There's also a section for authorized signers. So if the person that you're giving access to is also going to be an authorized signer, they would have to sign that as well.
Right.
There's check boxes for each program. We're not going to go through each program and what they do, but they are described on the back of the form. And there's quite a few of them. Like I said, we're not going through every one of them, but they are there on the back of the form for you to, if you're not familiar with them, what each program does, there's a description of them. So we also have a form that you can use to tell us who you want listed as your contacts. So everybody should have an agency head and a retirement contact at a minimum, those two positions. We recommend that you have more than that. There's a lot of job titles listed on there. You might not need every one of them, but as many as are relevant. And again, this form has to be the original form. We can't accept any copies, faxes, scans, emails. Now, this form does not have to be signed by the agency head or agency head designee. It just has to be signed by an authorized signer. Now, what if somebody wants to know who's currently listed as their contacts and who has update permissions? How would they find that out?
Right. If you look under the Employers tab in EMIS, you can click on the Employer Contacts, and you'll see the Employer Contacts listed. It'll have their title, what their position is, their name, phone number, extension, email address, anything that is associated with that person. And then underneath that, they would have their name and permissions listed, and whatever X is marked, whatever section is marked, that's what permissions they have. Again, if you're wanting to update the employer contacts, you would fill out a Form 1 EDC. And then if you wanted to update the permissions, you would fill out the Form 1.
I guess I do want to add how important it is, especially for our state agencies that traditionally don't have a lot of TRSL covered employees, to ensure that the contacts that we have on file are current. Anytime you have a new employee who's going to retain membership and that form is completed, it's got to be signed by an authorized signer or sometimes the agency head. And sometimes we don't have the current personnel and we have to reject forms because we don't have a valid signature.
Right.
Right. And for state agencies, anytime there's a new administration, the governorship changes.
Yes.
A lot of agency heads change as well. And if you haven't, updated your contacts since the governorship changed, which some agencies haven't,
Yes.
noticed that some of them still have, people listed as agency heads that I know are no longer at that agency.
Right.
Take a look, see who you have listed, who's listed as your agency head, and if necessary, submit us a new form so we can get that up to date.
Right, because what you see is what we see, and if you're there and you're not listed on this, we don't know how to contact you.
Yeah. In addition to agency head, if you have any changes in your HR managers, your HR analysts, your HR process, because that's usually who the people. That's usually the employer contacts we have is usually HR related personnel.
Right, and it's easy to kind of lose track of that because some of U.S. state agencies might have one or two people in TRSL, so
Right.
it's not at the front of your mind to keep us up to date on everything.
Right.
But when you need to do something for the one or two people that are in TRSL, you might not be able to do it because we don't have the right people listed as contacts, or the people that have permissions no longer employed there. So please, go ahead and check those screens and make sure they're up to date.
Right.
And if you're having trouble getting into EMIS and you want to know who the contacts are, reach out to your assigned liaison, Ms. Quincia. She'll be able to assist you.
Yes.
So moving on to the next index, we're going to talk about TRSL membership. So, state agencies, you don't have online access to the enrollment program. You're going to be submitting a paper document, the Form 2R. That's the retained membership form. So your hiring packet obviously has to include that Form 2R. You're going to submit the original to us. Once we get it, we'll review it and we'll actually process that enrollment for you. But that form is required. The next form, the Form 2 FRB, the forfeiture of benefits form, you're going to answer some questions on that Form 2R, and the way that you answer those questions is going to determine whether or not that forfeiture of benefits form is required or not. If it is, do not submit it to TRSL. That's a form that you would keep in your own personnel files. If it was ever needed, at a later date, TRSL would request it, but you don't have to send that form to us unless it's requested. The next form is the Form 2SS. That's the Social Security form. You might be wondering, hey, do we still have to fill out this form with the recent changes to, Social Security, where they've eliminated those two offsets, the WEP and the GPO. Yes, we've modified that form, so it's, shorter now. So we are still asking you to submit that form to us. If, for some reason you had a printed out stack of the old forms, you can discard those and start using that new form. But this one, submit a copy to us and you can hold on to the original. And the last form you'd want to include is our beneficiary form. This is our Form 3. Again, this is available on our website. I would recommend that you include this in your packet, but ask your employers to submit that form directly to us. You don't want them sending it back to you and then you being responsible for sending it to us. That could create a delay. You just don't want to be responsible for getting that form back to us. Nothing good could happen from a delay or that form getting lost. If they do return it to you, then you would send it to us as soon as possible. Like don't hold it and wait till you have a stack of them. But ideally, you would be giving that to your employee and then they would be returning it to us.
Mm.
So this is just a closer look at that 2R, the election and retained membership form. Again, you want to make sure that they have the 5 years in TRSL, 5 years of eligibility credit, and we mentioned earlier where they can go in EMIS to see if they have enough years. If somebody is borderline, call us and we can work together to figure out if they're eligible or not. That 5 years, that's not a rounded 5 years. If somebody has 4.99, they need 5.
Right.
That's not going to round up to 5.
Right. Well, if they're that close and borderline, what we call borderline, we'll probably, double, get their service credit verified to
Right.
ensure if they have the 5 years, if it's somebody who really wants to stay with teachers.
Yep. Now, there's also a time frame on submitting these forms to us. They should be submitted to us within 60 days. And we need the original of this form. Has to be filled out correctly. We don't like having to reject forms.
Right.
So please make sure that it's filled out completely and correctly before sending it to us.
And whoever is signing at the bottom, contact us, make sure that we have your signature on file.
Right. This is a situation where if it's not up to date, if we don't have you listed as an authorized signer, we'll have to reject it.
Yes.
So please that's why it's so important to keep that up to date.
Yes.
Now, the eligibility requirements for state agencies are a lot simpler than for the other presentations that we do. They have to have 5 years in TRSL, and if they don't have at least 10 years, they can't be a part-time, seasonal, or temporary.
Right.
We don't typically see a lot of part-time, seasonal, temporary employees from state agencies.
Right.
But if you do have somebody that's working 20 hours or less per week, they're seasonal or temporary, they would have to have 10 years in order to be eligible for TRSL.
Right.
So they could have the 5 years where they could retain membership, but if they're not, full-time, or they're seasonal and temporary, they're not eligible. They have to have the 10 years.
I think I've seen one time where there was a new hire at a state agency. They wanted to retain membership with teachers, but they were not able to because they did not have the 10 years, and the position with the state agency was listed as WAE, like a temporary.
Yeah, it happens, but it's
not very common.
Yeah. That magic number is 10 years. Once they have 10 years, you don't have to worry about part-time, seasonal, temporary.
No, they're truly vested at that time. Yes.
Truly.
So I mentioned earlier that report that tells you who is in ORP that has the option to join TRSL. We'll talk about that a little bit more here. So one group of people have a 1-year window. Those are ORP participants with the first eligible date before August 1st, 2020, and they had to be active and contributing as of June of 2024. Again, that window closes on June 30th, 2025. So we tried to make it easy to identify those people. There's that report you can pull, but also on the member summary screen, there's a new field, this ORP to TRSL election eligibility. So if somebody is in ORP, That field is going to be populated. If they're eligible, it's going to be in green. If they're not eligible, it's going to say, going to be in red. I think it's going to say not eligible, or get the exact wording, but it's going to be in red text.
Yes.
We want to emphasize these 1 year people. They have the June 30th, 2025 deadline. That's a hard deadline. We received the form on July 1st, too late, and we can't process it. The other group of people have a 5-year window. So these are people who are in ORP. Their first eligible date for joining ORP was on or after August 1st, 2020. The difference, one of the differences between this group and the 1 year group is these people, their window doesn't all close on the same day. Now, the 1 year window, that's a hard window for everybody, June 30th, 2025. The 5-year people, that window starts from their ORP first eligible date. So they all have different dates that that window closes on. And again, the member summary screen is going to show you whether they're in the 1 year window or the 5-year window and when that window closes. So if you do have somebody that is in ORP that's eligible to join TRSL, this is the form that you would submit to us, letting us know of their election. We would then process that form and do the enrollment into TRSL. This form, another one that we need the original of, we can't accept the copy, scans, electronic signatures, any of that stuff. This is a 2-page form, or depending how you print it, could be front and back, but the employee is going to fill out the first page, the employer fills out the second page. This is a very detailed form. There's a lot of fields to fill out. It has to be filled out completely in order for us to accept it. On the first page, the employee, there's 5 statements that they have to initial. They can't put a check mark. That has to be their actual initials. Again, we don't like having to reject forms. It's kind of a headache for everybody. So please, if you have anybody that's, electing to join TRSL, take a good look at the form before you submit it to us. Make sure that everything is complete. Since it is a 2-page form, make sure that it's sent to us intact, both pages. We don't want the member sending us 1 page and you sending us another. Please, keep that all together and get that to us. Then once we get it, so we'll handle the enrollment from there.
And we've talked about a lot of forms being the original. A lot of our forms aren't, they're not needing to be the original. But if you look at the top right of the form, any form that needs to be the original, it will state in big bold letters.
I see a couple of questions coming in. One says, can you please repeat about the 10-year eligibility for a part-time employee? So as a state agency, you're not employing typically classroom teachers. So for non-classroom teachers, they need 10 years in order to be eligible if they're part-time, seasonal, and temporary. So if you have somebody that doesn't have 10 years of service credit for eligibility in TRSL, they're not going to be eligible working part-time, seasonal, temporary. So if you have somebody that's retaining membership and they have, say, 7 years and they're working 20 hours or less per week, or they're seasonal or temporary, they would not be eligible for membership in TRSL.
Right. Even though they have the 5 years, they don't have 10 years to be eligible. So there's membership eligibility or retaining membership, and then which is 5 years. But part-time, seasonal, or temporary, they need the 10 years.
There's the next question. If an employee is in teachers and recently started with the state and elected to join lasers, is there a form that the employee should sign to be submitted to teachers? So normally, as a state agency, whenever you have a new hire, most of your positions are lasers eligible positions. They're not TRSL eligible positions. So when you have a new hire, whether or not they were previously in teachers or not, if they want to go into lasers, there's nothing that we need on our end. Because we know that employee, that employee is not with a TRSL covered employer, like a school board or a university or college.
Yeah, I'm just briefly looking at some of these questions that are coming in.
Mhm.
If an employee, okay, so this question is asking if an employee accepts a non-teaching position and they are a TRSL member but have less than 5 years in TRSL's ORP, can they opt to join lasers? If so, will they need to complete a Form 16? So if they don't have 5 years in ORP, they can't retain membership in TRSL. They would, if it's a lasers eligible position, they would have to join lasers.
And that would be up to lasers, whatever form is needed there.
Right, but it wouldn't be our Form 16.
Right.
No.
Briefly looking at a couple other questions that have come in. Let's see.
That falls under return to work. It wouldn't be in teachers.
If someone was enrolled in TRSL with over 10 years contribution but retired, so I guess this would be a TRSL retiree.
Mm-hmm.
They're hired with an agency, but their job title is not a teacher or instructor. They'd be eligible to remain in teachers. So now we have somebody that retained membership with the state agency, retired from TRSL, and now they're a new hire with another state agency, because that would be in a lasers position. Would they be able to remain in teachers? The answer is no. They would have to be enrolled in lasers because they would, as a retiree, they would no longer be in a TRSL eligible position.
And I guess we should emphasize everything we're talking about in this section is dealing with someone who's not already retired with teachers. It's a non-retiree.
Right. I mean, with state agencies, we don't really see return to work.
Right,
So
you're right.
those are going to be lasers eligible
Right.
positions. Right. All right. So let's pick up where we were. We're talking about this. The form required for somebody to join TRSL after ORP participation. I think we covered everything on that. Talked about it needed to be an original, make sure that it's filled out properly. And this is actually a good segue. Our next topic is going to be about ORP, the Optional Retirement Plan. We're going to take a very quick break just to switch out panelists real quick, and we'll be right back. All right, and we're back. And Jessica Trosclair has joined us to talk about ORP.
Good morning, everybody.
So when we talk about ORP, I guess the best place to start is just pretty basic. what is ORP?
Right, that's the place. So ORP stands for Optional Retirement Plan, and it is kind of like the name suggests, an alternative to the teacher's retirement system. So an alternative to the pension system. It is available to those in unclassified positions within higher education, and it was really created to provide an avenue for individuals who either may not be in a position that's eligible for teachers because it's part-time or temporary, or for those who may find themselves, in different states over the course of their career. They're not going to remain in one place to accrue a benefit with them. This ORP allows them, again, an avenue to accrue some sort of retirement benefit that is portable. It can follow them from state to state because lots of other universities and whatnot offer plans like this.
So you mentioned it being a kind of an alternative to TRSL. So there's some pretty big differences between, the defined benefit plan and their ORP's defined contribution plan, right?
Yes, definitely. So one of the big ones is the type of benefit that someone's going to get from the plans. So with the pension system, it's a defined benefit, meaning it's based on a formula. It's not tied to the dollar amount of contributions when the individual goes to retire. With the ORP account, that is strictly based on their contribution balance when they're ready to receive some sort of distribution. So it functions more like a 401k than the pension system. The other difference is how the investments are managed. So for the regular defined benefit plan, the employee and employer contributions are all pooled. We, the teachers' retirement system, invest all of those contributions on behalf of our membership, on behalf of the trust, and then we pay benefits, those formulaic benefits, from the gains on those investments. With the ORP, the individual participant is actually controlling their investment. So they're deciding how they're going to allocate those funds, how aggressive they want to be, and sort of driving that vehicle. The other thing to point out about it is that individuals with the ORP don't necessarily retire. And Jeff's kind of hit on, once they're in ORP, they're kind of always in ORP. And that kind of stays the same for them retiring. They can access these funds once they stop working, once they go inactive. But if at some point they were to be reemployed in a teacher's eligible position, they would just start contributing all over again. They're vested on day one, so they don't have to wait until they're a certain age or a certain year of service credit. They just have to not be active to receive those funds.
Now you mentioned for the defined benefit plan, the TRSL, invests that money,
Right.
handles, kind of manages that money. Who does it for ORP?
Yeah, so with ORP contributions, teachers, we're really just a flow-through agency. So when we get those funds, those contributions from you all, we send them out to the respective carriers. And we've had the same three since the plan's inception. They've gone through some name changes, but it is Voya, TIA, and Corebridge. I believe Voya used to be VALIC and Corebridge was AIG, but today these are the three names. And we actually have what they call a microsite. So you could direct someone to our website. They could find these icons out there and click on it, and it will take them directly to the ORP, Louisiana ORP landing page for these specific vendors.
So we touched on eligibility requirements a little bit earlier for being able to retain membership or state agencies. What's the eligibility for ORP?
Right. So for you guys, since you're state agencies, you're really not offering ORP at any point. Individuals or employees that you have who are participating in the ORP, it's because they made that election at some other point in time. And either they don't have that window that we've kind of referenced under Act 109, or they've just chosen not to make that election. So because it's an irrevocable election, when they move into, from higher ed to a state position, they can elect to retain membership if they have the 5 years. And then at that point, that ORP participation continues on forever and ever, unless they make that exception with the window. And that's the same thing for K-12 as well.
Yeah, so we talked about, ORP kind of being a permanent,
Right.
deal, but there's some
A caveat.
Yes.
Yeah. I always say that there's an asterisk on it, but Jeff briefly mentioned this, but again, there's a limited window that most people have, depending on their eligibility, depending on when they started, to choose to leave the ORP and join teachers. Most of the people will have that window close on June 30th, but we will still have new people or individuals that are still within a 5-year window. So you may have someone that says that they want to go ahead and make that switch. If they've retained membership, they can still elect to leave the ORP and join teachers. But for the most part, your participation or your interactions with this law and with the ORP in general isn't going to be huge.
So each month, employers send us contributions both for the DB plan and for ORP.
Right.
What do we do with those ORP contributions when we get them?
Yes. So the rates are a little different. And what we do, we really parse out the employer contributions because you all do pay that UAL amount. So we sort of separate the funds. We take out an admin fee on the employees, 8%. We separate the UAL, and then we take it. It shows it's 14.15%. That's the contributions that sort of belong to that individual participant. We immediately send them sort of out of the house and to that respective ORP carrier. So again, we're just kind of a flow-through agency. We keep the UAL and the admin fee, and everything else goes to that participant's account as quickly as we can do so.
Now, there's a limit on how much somebody can
Yes.
contribute to ORP, right?
Yes. So like we said, this ORP plan functions a lot like a 401k. So there's a lot of different IRC guidelines that it's subject to. One of this is an annual, on a calendar year basis, contribution limit. So for 2025, it's 70,000. We do provide a courtesy. We run a report at the end of the year to see who has hit this, but we really encourage you guys to keep up with it because once they hit that limit, neither employee or employer contributions should be remitted. And you would want to make sure you have enough time to correct your salary files so that you're not reporting money and then having to go and remove it.
Now, when somebody that's in ORP terminates, what should the employer do?
Not much. So again, they really don't retire. So if they're retiring with you, but for our purpose, they're not going to be considered retiring. There's no form to fill out. You really don't even have to submit a termination date to us. The most important thing is that you just sort of update your HR system or your software so that you don't continue to try to report them when there's nothing to report. There are scenarios if someone retires and then immediately requests a distribution of that account, we may need a term date and to know the last month that those contributions are going to be reported. And that's to guarantee there's no in-service distribution. I would reach out to you directly if we needed that term date. Otherwise, there's nothing in the TRSL EMIS system that you need to do when an ORP participant's employment ends.
Okay. Well, I think that was a really great overview of ORP. I don't see any questions coming in regarding ORP. At this time, we're going to take just a 10-minute break. When we come back, we're going to dive into Index 4, deals with monthly earnings, salary contributions.
That's good. Thanks, y'all.
All right, we're back. Thanks for hanging in with us today. Like I said, this index, Index 4 is one of our larger indexes. It's going to contain a lot of information about, submitting that monthly salary file to us, then making any corrections, clearing exceptions that were created by that file.
Yes, it's one of my favorite indexes. It goes over special situations. Again, like Jeff said, it is a large index, but it does have a field of contents you can search specifically, but it does go over, like I said, special cases in very detailed instructions on how to submit the contributions for those situations, and it has screenshots from our EMIS. It walks you through exactly how to submit those corrections.
So let's just take a look at the contribution rates. So for state agencies, y'all are really paying the K-12 regular plan rate. So for current year, the employer rate's 21.51%. For next fiscal year, going to drop down to 20.95%. So, things are moving in the right direction. So we want to see employer contribution rate going down. Just want to note that there's a election at the end of this month, constitutional amendment, Amendment 2. Depending on how that turns out, if that passes, that rate will go down even further. So as of now, it's going to be 20.95. We'll see if that changes based on the results of that election. If it does, we'll communicate that to all of our employers what the new rates will be.
And the member rate is 8%.
Right, that has not changed since
1988, I believe. Very long
time.
Right, so we know for state agencies, most of you, OSIP, Office of State Uniform Payroll, that's the entity that actually submits your monthly salary/contribution file and submits that monthly payment. So this is kind of a difference between our school boards,
Right.
Universities. Most of them are submitting that themselves, but we know that for you guys, OSIP is reporting that on your behalf.
Right.
So like I said, they submit the file and the payment. They submit that payment voucher, that Form 4D, tells us how to split up that payment once we receive it. Now, there's additional payments that might be necessary based on corrections that your agency does. So if your agency does prior corrections where you're changing, contributions or doing CCRs, which we'll get to in a little while, where you're changing contributions for current year, those could result in charges as well. And for those, the individual agency is responsible for paying those and for sending in that Form 4D to tell us how to apply that payment. Excuse me. And the Form 4D, the form itself has contact information on it, but there's also a special email, Form 4D at TRSL.org. That's where you can email us those forms. Kelly, you want to go over some basics of definitions of, when we talk about earnable compensation, what that is?
Right. Earnable comp is any wages, salary, or other payments earned by a member during a full normal working time in a position that is TRSL eligible. And that's defined in the statute under 11-701-10. Anything that is reported to us as earnable comp that is reported to us as actual earnings, that's the salary that they actually got paid. Again, no mystery on what we name things. The member and employer contributions must be made on all earnable comp. We work on a fiscal year basis. It's July 1st through June 30th, and the contributions are to be reported to us in a monthly payment. It's actually due on the 5th of the month, and after the 15th, it is considered late. And then any payment, any earnable comp, any payments made in the fiscal year has to be reported in the fiscal year that it's actually earned. So if someone is paid later in July for some that they earned in June, that money needs to be reported back in that earlier fiscal year.
When we talk about earnable compensation, excuse me, let's go over some things that would not be earnable compensation, maybe some common things that we see.
I would guess the most common would be, anytime you have a employee that resigns or retires, for most state agencies, they may be eligible for a payment of up to 300 hours of their annual leave. That's not considered earnable compensation. So if that is a TRSL covered employee, you would not withhold TRSL contributions on that payment of that unused leave. If you're a state agency that also pays your retiring employees up to 200 hours of sick leave, that is not considered earnable compensation. Again, you would not withhold TRSL contributions if it's a TRSL covered employee. I guess the other thing, the big thing we would see is sometimes for budget reasons, some agencies may offer a lump sum payment to entice certain employees to retire. If it's a lump sum employee for discontinuation of service, if it's a lump sum payment, that would not have TRSL contributions withheld for a TRSL covered employee.
Now, what about if they're paying somebody via 1099, like a contract?
Right. If they're paying someone a 1099, you're not going to, if you're just the primary employer, you're not going to, that's not earnable comp. You would not report that.
Right. And if somebody has primary employment somewhere else and they're paying them a 1099.
Right. So if you're hiring someone who is a primary, they're enrolled with another TRSL agency as the primary, and you're going to enroll them as secondary. If that person is paid an individual contract for more than $1,000, or if they're paid multiple contracts in a fiscal year, $1,000 or less, and they those multiple contracts exceed $15,000, then you're going to enroll them as secondary and report anything in excess of the $15,000.
Right. And that would have to be for
my retaining membership issue.
Right.
And they would have to have a full-time employer, and your agency would have to be the part-time secondary. If
right.
if they're
That
eligible.
would not be a common.
It's not common.
Not for state agencies.
Not for state
Right.
agencies.
Right.
So let's talk about full-time earnings when we think about it on a monthly basis on what should be reported
Right.
to us on that monthly salary file.
Right. So the definition of full-time earnings is everything a person could have earned during that reporting period. And for these purposes, we're talking about the month. So if someone was on leave without pay, maybe for the whole month, you would report zeros maybe for the actual earnings, but their full-time earnings needs to be what they could have earned for that entire month. If their part-time percent effort, which is, again, not common, but if someone is working every single day of the year and they're working less than the full day, then you would report whatever their part-time earnings are and the actual earnings. But the full-time earnings is what they could have earned working the full day at 100% effort.
Right. Like, again, this is kind of in the title, full-time earnings.
Right.
What they would have earned had they worked full-time for that whole reporting period.
Yeah, and I think we give an example at the bottom. For most state agencies, for a typical 2-pay period month, that would be what they could have made for 2 80-hour biweekly paychecks.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about a monthly contribution file, let's talk about, I guess, types of contributions.
Right.
Really, you're going to have either sheltered or unsheltered. And on this slide, we also wanted to add those numbers. You see sheltered, you have type 30, unsheltered type 10.
Mm-hmm.
Those numbers correspond to, I guess, fields in that monthly file where the file layout, I'm not going to get into great detail about everything in that file layout. It's a lot of characters, but
Right.
Type 30 corresponds to sheltered and 10 corresponds to unsheltered. They'll also see that, we'll cover this a little bit later when we get to contribution corrections.
Right.
When you go on that screen, it's not going to say sheltered or unsheltered, it's going to say 30 or 10.
Right.
So we wanted to put this on here so that you you can see, hey, 30 goes for sheltered, 10 corresponds with unsheltered. So your sheltered contributions, that's going to be your typical active members,
Right.
including people working after drop. There could be some scenarios where active members are going to be unsheltered. That's if they're on workman's comp and they're not using a combination of sick leave and workman's comp. It's all strictly workers' comp. USERA payments, that's when somebody's on military leave. Sharon, I think you actually know that acronym. I think.
Oh, yeah.
The other day.
Yeah, USERA, it's a federal statute. It stands for Uniform Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. It's been in effect since, I think, 1994, since that first Gulf War, I think. Is when
Yeah,
they
so
enacted it.
somebody's, if they qualify for that, those contributions will be unsheltered. But typically for active members, everything else is going to be sheltered.
Right.
And of course, employer contributions are unsheltered. So I wanted to cover on here something that's still relatively new. If we get that monthly salary file and it contains ORP participants on it, that entire file is going to be rejected. We're going to get a report showing us that it was rejected with a listing of each member that caused it to be rejected and the reason why. If it's for ORP, we're going to coordinate with OSIP for any rejected files that they submit. Let them know why it was rejected and what they need to do to correct it so they can get it submitted to us and we can accept it. If there's an ORP participant on there, it's kind of a two-step process.
Right.
You want to take them off and make sure that you then put them on the ORP file. So if they've already submitted the ORP file, they need to double up that person on next month's file.
Right.
So I would say it's a good practice to submit the defined benefit file first. That way, if there is an ORP participant on there that belongs on the ORP file, you can then take them off and then put them on the ORP file for this month, not have to worry about doubling up following month.
Right.
And if that situation occurs, I would just say that in OSIP, you'll also, if it's somebody is supposed to be an ORP and you're trying to report them on that regular defined benefit plan file, you'll also have to go into LA Gov and change that deduction code for the retirement contributions.
Right, because if not,
It's going to happen each month, right?
Yes.
It's going to be a manual process each month of correcting it.
Right.
Yes.
So when that file comes into us, that monthly salary file, a couple of things are going to happen. Ideally, the file's perfect. That's
Which for state agencies that may happen because you only have one, especially if you only have one or two covered employees.
right, depending on the size of your
Right.
employment. But if you have a decent number, there's a chance that something's on that file that we're not expecting, or something isn't on the file that we are expecting. That would be considered an exception.
Right.
Yes.
Another thing is some of that data, some of that information on that file could just be rejected.
Right.
So there's two reports available to show you the exceptions and the rejections. And these should really be looked at on a monthly basis, ideally right after that file is submitted. So when OSIP submits that file, if you're not sure when they're submitting it, say that they're due each month on the 15th.
So I would say anytime after the 15th of the month, you want to check it.
Anything after that, you should be pulling these and seeing what you need to correct.
Right.
So let's start with the contribution exceptions report. Let's go over, I guess, some basics of where is it, how do they pull it, and just kind of go from there.
Okay, so whenever you're logged into our employer access site, what we call our EMIS, you'll go under that employer's menu and choose employer contribution charges. That charges screen is going to pull up, and on the left side of the screen, it'll have the query record section. Your system code is always going to be 4 for state agencies, and you'll put in the current fiscal year. Right now, it's fiscal year 2025. You will not have to put in your employer ID because whenever you log into our access site, our EMIS site, it will already know your employer ID. Once you've got those fields filled in for your query record, click the select button, and the screen is going to refresh, and it's going to show you every month so far for the current fiscal year where OSIP or your agency has already submitted a salary file covering that reporting month. So in this example screen, that agency has sent in files covering July through October. If what you're looking for is for each reporting month to say report in blue font, if it has the red error in red font, that error message in red font, that means there are some exceptions for that reporting month. Exceptions are reporting or enrollment errors, or missing information. So you want to make sure you clear that each month, review, pull the screen each month, see if there's anything been identified as an exception, as an error. Pull in that, click on that, pull that report, see if you have any exceptions. Now there's two ways you can pull that exceptions report. You can either click on the most recent month that has that red error message. In this case, it would be October. Now, whenever you do order a report in our system, if you never ordered a report before on the laptop or computer or device that you're using, it will pop-up block. So you'll have to disable pop-up blocks to see our reports. But if you run it again, and after you disable your pop-up blocks, run it again, it will show you your report. So that's one way you can pull it. Let me show you the other way. The other way that you pull it, and you may find, we'll go on the next screen. You may find, oh, okay, this is the last error message. Okay, so this is what we were talking about, clicking on the last error message.
Yeah, it's cumulative. So you always want to pick on the most recent one, even if
there's multiple months, earlier months. Yes, always the last month that's showing up. So this is going to show you your default report in Social Security number order. But let me show you how to pull the report in a different way. You're still at that same screen, that employer contribution charges screen. But instead of clicking on the last red error message, in that query records section on the left side, where it says under custom report help, where it says report type, make sure complete report is selected. And for sort selection, you can either sort it by Social Security number, alphabetically by their last name, or exception message. If you're a state agency with, say, more than 10 TRSL covered employees, you may find the exception message sort selection to be the most beneficial. But once you select your report type and your sort selection, when you hit generate report, it'll create your report and it'll sort it based on the way you elected to sort.
Mm-hmm.
While we're talking about the contribution exception report, let's just talk a little bit about why it's so important for employers to stay on top of that, and how it plays into the closeout process.
Right.
So we're in mid-March now.
Yes.
We're getting close, pretty close to the end of the fiscal year. We've got a few months left, but June 30th, the fiscal year closes. As part of our closeout process, every employer has to clear all their exceptions.
Right.
Yes.
So it's best to clear them during the year, not let them build up until the end of the year. Then you've got a whole bunch to do at the last minute, and that's why we emphasize exception reports so much, because they can get out of hand if you're not careful. So that's why you hear us talk about that. That's why we're contacting you so much about exception reports, and why it's such a big part of this presentation today.
Yes. And I think the next slide shows you an example exceptions report. We've got the employee's name and social blurred out, but you would be able to see all of that data. And this is an example of a state agency's exceptions report. And in this case, it's got 6 records. And you would want to, sometimes it may just be simple. It just may need an enrollment. Sometimes it may be someone who doesn't work for you anymore that needs to be terminated. But sometimes it can be something more serious, where maybe contributions should be remitted each month and they're not being withheld.
Right, or maybe the wrong amount was submitted to us.
Mm-hmm. Or we got the wrong, or the earnings are being reported under the incorrect Social Security number.
Right.
That's like on this one, the last one, unknown name.
Yes.
So that could be a wrong social. They might be enrolled under a different number.
Right.
And money is being reported under another number.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that could happen. I guess the main point is you should be checking this report regularly, and clearing these exceptions.
Right.
Now, exceptions are one thing. That's where the file has something that we're not expecting or doesn't have something that we are expecting. Rejections are a little bit different, right?
Right, they're a little bit different. So you go to the same place to find it. After you've pulled up the screen for your exceptions, if you have any rejections for that fiscal year, it will have a box that says show rejections. Once you click on that box, you'll scroll down to the bottom of the screen, and then it will list your rejections in calendar year order. Unlike the exceptions, where if you clear the exceptions, the report gets cleared off and it's no more exceptions, the rejections will stay throughout the fiscal year and even after the fiscal year closes. So with these, unlike the exceptions, like Jeff was saying, you sent something that we weren't expecting and it got posted to the members' account, or you didn't send something that we were expecting. This is money that you are sending to us, but it's not getting allocated to that member's account. It was totally rejected, so it is sitting in your, it's just sitting out there, and it needs to be reconciled. So, and we'll talk about how to do that in a minute.
Yeah, and this is a close-up screen of somebody's rejections, and you see the error message on some of these.
Right, negative numbers.
Yeah, negative money is always going to be rejected.
That's really big in OSA, because I think in lasers you can probably do that, but in our system we don't allow it.
Right.
Right.
There's a different method to make corrections if money needs to be taken away.
Right. If somebody was overpaid in
Overpaid.
1 month, you can't just report negative the next one. You actually have to go back and correct that previous month.
Yes.
Right. And we're going to discuss that in a minute.
Now, there are some rejections that might not require anything. So if the rejection is because there's zero earnings, zero contributions, zero full-time, that means that you report to somebody on the file as not being paid, no contributions, everything's zero.
Right.
So we rejected it, but when we were rejecting zeros, really nothing was coming in, and we rejected it.
Right.
Those might not
Nothing to
require any
clear.
action.
Right.
Now, some of these might also be on that contribution exception report if maybe there should have been a full-time amount listed, like somebody's on leave without pay.
Right.
In that case, the actual earnings would be zero, contributions would be zero, but there should be a full-time amount. So somebody could be on your rejection report and also showing up as enrolled not reported on that contribution exception report.
Right. Because your summer months, June, July, and August, doesn't need a specific full-time rate. It can be zero, but the other months, it has to, if you're reporting earnings, even if zero, the full-time rate cannot be zero.
Right. And typically for state agencies, we would expect money even in the summer for them as well.
Right.
So we talk about clearing your exceptions and rejections. So let's go over the programs that employers would use to clear those.
Right.
So there's really 3 ways.
Right.
Of a contribution correction. That's where you're correcting current fiscal year earnings and contributions. Enrollments, which in this case, the enrollment would be a 2R, not an actual online enrollment.
Right.
And terminations. So let's kind of go through these one by one. For contribution corrections, we mentioned this is how employers would correct current year money.
Right.
So I guess like maybe some scenarios where what type of exception would they use a contribution correction for?
Right. So if you had like reported not enrolled, and the person wasn't eligible and you reported money, then you would go into a contribution correction to delete that earnings. And just keep in mind, when you're doing a contribution correction, those corrections can only be done in the current fiscal year for a month. So other times you might have
Their contributions unreasonable.
right, they're unreasonable, or maybe you reported the The full-time rate is just the monthly salary and it didn't include a stipend. So the full-time rate can never be less than the actual earnings. And so that would be an exception. And maybe you need to go in and edit those earnings. If sometimes you may have someone on workers' comp and the earnings should have been unsheltered. If you do that, you're going to have to go in and delete the earnings and then add them back as unsheltered.
Right, on this screen, you'll notice that contribution type. This goes back earlier, we're talking about sheltered versus unsheltered. It's not going to say sheltered or unsheltered. It's going to give you the number. So in this case, 30, which was sheltered.
Right. And again, and we're pulling all of this from our procedures manual. And so if you are looking to correct someone's record, these special situations are in our Index 4, and there are specific instructions and screenshots like you're seeing here from EMIS walking you through how to do each type of correction, whether you're adding, editing, or changing, or deleting.
And I do want to address a question that just came in. The full-time earnings can never be less than the actual earnings. So actual earnings is the gross amount that the employee made. Full-time earnings is the most the employee could have made for that month. So if an employee is paid every 2 weeks, and every 2 weeks their normal 80-hour check gross would be $2,000, and they would normally get 2 checks that month, full-time would be $4,000. But if during that month they had some kind of leave without pay dockage situation, and instead of earning their normal $4,000, they only earned $3,800, actual for that month would be $3,800, full-time would be $4,000.
Right. And also with that, say they're getting $4,000 a month and then they got like $500 extra. If the actual earnings is $4,500, then that full-time should be $4,500.
Right. If not, it's going to create an exception. You'll see that on your exception report that
Actual greater than full-time, something like that.
yeah. And somebody has a question about, can you restate the information regarding the months that do not require postings? There's some months that we can accept zeros for. That's the summer months. So that would typically be for school boards. For state agencies, if somebody's employed, we're expecting money.
Right.
So that's really more for K-12 and higher ed agencies where, people that work 9-month contracts.
Yes.
But for state agencies, typically it's going to be a 12-month contract. So money should be reported each month.
Right. And if you enroll someone in July, there's going to be a code that's code 4, and that means you can report money or not. But like Jeff said, most state agencies, they're a 12-month contract. And even if you're enrolled in July, where you don't have to report that money, or you can, most state agencies are going to report that money to give them that full fiscal year.
Right. So let's say an employer has, clearing their exception report and they're doing a bunch of CCRs, and maybe they lose track of what they've done, or they want to go back and see the records they've corrected to make sure that they didn't make a mistake. Where can they go to kind of see a record of what they've done regarding their CCRs?
Well, in our system, when you're in our employer access site, our EMIS site, if you're under that employer's menu, if you choose monthly correction journal, you can query 1 month at a time, the month and year, and you can see all the contribution corrections done, or what we call CCRs, that were done for that reporting month. And that will show you if there was additional contributions that are due, or if there was a reduction in contributions where your agency may get a credit.
Right. I want to. We mentioned this earlier, but we know that for state agencies, like OSIP is reporting that salary file, but it's still the individual agency's responsibility to go check their exceptions and make any corrections to clear them. And ideally, communicate with LeGov if they're doing something on their end that's going to continue to create that exception, to talk with them to get that corrected at the source, so that the agency doesn't have to manually correct it month after month after month.
Right.
And I guess one more thing about those correction journals, if you are doing contribution corrections and it results in adjusted contributions where additional contributions are due, is our understanding that OSIP is not going to send the contribution payment for those additional contributions due. That's going to be responsibility of each individual agency.
Right. When you send that payment, you're going to be sending a 4D with that, explaining which month it's for, because the 4D is monthly.
Yeah.
So when we talk about exceptions, the vast majority of them have to do with enrollments and terminations. Reported not enrolled, enrolled not reported. Those are the most common types of exceptions. Now, not everybody that's reported not enrolled, needs an enrollment, but most of them do. And, not everybody that's being reported not enrolled
Mm-hmm.
or enrolled not reported needs a termination, but most of them do.
Right.
So if people stay on top of their enrollments, in this case via the 2R and terminations, your exception reports can be pretty low.
Right.
And for state agencies, when you're dealing with, kind of a limited number of enrollments or employees in the first place, if you stay on top of enrollments and terminations, you shouldn't have much left as far as exceptions.
And remember, your enrollment termination is not just what you do in LeGov, it's what you do in our system also.
Yeah, just remembering, hey, you terminate this person in LeGov, take that next step to terminate them in TRSL. So for terminations, where can they go in our system to do a termination?
Right. In EMIS, you're going to go under the updates tab and you're going to click on terminations.
Right, and from there, you just go in, edit, enter the termination date, and that's going to terminate them in our system.
Right.
Yeah, that's probably the most straightforward program we have.
Yeah, that's not
Exactly. Yeah. And most anything you're going to be doing is under the updates.
And the termination date we want is their last day of work, not their last check date. So if their last day of work was June 30th, we want the June 30th date, even if they're going to get a paycheck on July 10th. We want that June 30th date.
last day actually worked.
Actually works.
And you can enter that term date before they get that check
Yes, if you as soon as you know it.
in our system.
Right. So the next index we're talking about is Index 6. This is, another relatively large index. It covers service credit, correcting service credit, full-time corrections, prior year corrections, freshman year certifications, just the methods of how we calculate service credit and how to certify service credit.
Right.
So we kind of went through some terms in the last index talking about actual earnings, full-time earnings. So we're going to cover those again, but in a different context.
Right.
So let's just start with, because we're going to talk about this word a lot, questionable year, that term.
Yes.
So let's just kind of define what is a questionable year.
Right. A questionable year is any fiscal year record that meets one of TRSL's criteria to require service credit corrections or certifications. And we're going to go over those criteria in just a minute.
Now, we spoke about actual earnings just a minute ago, but we were talking about it then on a monthly basis.
Right.
So when we're talking about, a questionable year in service credit, what do we mean by actual earnings?
Actual earnings is anything that the person has accrued in the full fiscal year, anything that they've been paid that is considered earnable comp.
And similarly for full-time,
Right.
just spoke about full-time earnings on a, how it's represented on that monthly salary file.
Right.
Now we're talking about the year as a whole.
Right. So the full-time earnings is everything they could have earned in that full fiscal year. So it's their yearly salary plus any extra earnings that they could have earned during that year.
Now, for most state employees don't have a lot of extra earnings. So for most of your state employees that do not have that extra earnings, that full-time earnings is going to be their annual salary.
Right.
And service credit is just how we measure the number of years that a member has accrued in our system.
Mm-hmm.
There's a really simple formula for calculating that. It's just actual earnings divided by full-time earnings. That's going to be the service credit for benefit computation. And that's why it's so important to have, correct actual earnings and correct full-time earnings, because if those numbers aren't correct, the person's service credit won't be correct.
Right.
So there's two types of service credit for benefit computation. That's what we use to actually calculate somebody's benefit.
Right.
Service credit for eligibility, that's service credit for benefit computation divided by percent effort. And that tells us when somebody's actually eligible to retire.
Right.
So
I think Laser's formulas may be similar for service credit.
yeah, I'm sure it is.
Mhm.
Now we talk about, we just introduced a new term, percent effort.
Right.
So let's talk about what what is percent effort?
Right. And so we mentioned it just briefly earlier, but percent effort is for anyone who is working every single day of the contract, but they're not working the full day of the contract. And this, again, is we call it part-time percent effort, but it's not everybody who's part-time, but they have to work every single day of the contract.
Every day of the week.
Every day of the week, right. And so once you determine, how many hours a week, how many hours a day they're working, you're going to divide that by the number of hours that are considered in a full day. For example, if someone's working 5 out of 8 hours a day, their percent effort would be 63%.
Yeah, and we don't see this as much with state agencies as we do with K-12 and higher ed, but you could have some people that are working less than a full day.
Right.
And if you do, this is how you calculate their percent effort.
Yes, and so once you calculate that percent effort and you put that in, and we'll go over later the importance of making sure that you do that.
So we mentioned questionable years, like what is a questionable year, but where can employers go to identify questionable years that need to be certified?
Yeah, okay, so whenever you are in our EMIS employer access site, whenever you're under that reports menu, every report that you have under that menu option is in alphabetical order, but choose the one that says questionable years. That will bring you to the questionable years report input screen. You can choose different types of reports. You can choose what's called the retirement actions pending questionable years report, where that will list any priority records that we need your agencies to certify. And they're going to be deemed priority if it's someone who is in the process of retiring, maybe they're in the process of entering drop, maybe they've contacted us about purchasing service credit, or maybe about getting an official estimate. For whatever reason, we've deemed those priority records. So the first report option would just give you what we call retirement actions pending, the priority records to certify. The next option would be all outstanding questionable years. If your state agency has very few TRSL covered employees, I think for most of you, just choosing all outstanding questionable years is going to be sufficient. Because you're not going to have a whole lot. But if you have, say, more than 20 TRSL covered employees, I'll talk a little bit about the last 3 options. One of the options is to pull a report where it's going to list any fiscal years that are 3 years old or younger. And the other options are going to be any records that are over 3 years old. We'll talk a little bit why that 3-year timeline is kind of important in a couple of slides from now. And the last option would be if you want to pull a report where it's just for a single fiscal year. For example, if you want to pull all the questionable years for last year, fiscal year 2024, you can certainly do that. No matter what report option you choose, you have the option to sort it the way you want. You can sort it by the member's social security number. You can sort it by fiscal year order, sort it by member status order. That would be their status in TRSL, and reason code order. Reason code has to deal with why that record was questionable, why it's requiring certification.
So this is just an example of the output of a questionable year report. So let's kind of go through what those reason codes are and what the criteria for why a year would be questionable. So there's 4 different reasons why a year would show up on this report. Reason code 1, somebody's salary decreases more than 5% from the previous year. If that happens, that year is going to be flagged as questionable and needing certification. Reason 2, first year of employment or first year of employment after drop. Everybody's first year of employment is questionable no matter what, as well as the first year after drop. Reason code 3, they changed employers, they terminated during the fiscal year. That's going to be questionable also. And reason code 4, if anybody's service credit is less than a full year. So if it's not, a full year of service credit, it's a partial year, it's going to be questionable. Years can be questionable for a single reason or for multiple reasons.
Right.
But on this example, all these screen prints are going to look a little bit different because we've removed the names and socials. But when you run it, you'll You'll see their names and socials, see who you're dealing with. But this just lists, questionable years.
Yes.
Now, once you've, pulled that report, identified which years are questionable, the next step is to actually certify them.
Right.
So there's 3 ways to certify service credit. There's full-time only corrections, questionable year certification, and prior year salary corrections. So we're going to kind of go into details on all 3 of these, and we're going to start with full-time only corrections. So Kelly, you want to kind of give them some details about full-time only corrections, that process?
Right. When you're doing a full-time only correction, it's when either the full-time rate is incorrect or the service credit is incorrect. So if you're needing to do a full-time only correction, it's going to ask you for the full-time earnings. You're going to type in the full-time earnings, and then you're going to either list a reason or a comment. You can list both, but there's only so many character spaces for the reason and the comment. If it's something simple, you can just put first year of employment, last year of employment under the reason code. If it's something very unique like workers' comp or leave without pay, extra earnings, anything weird, you want to put in a comment. Just keep in mind the full-time only correction. A lot of people think that you can't use that if the full-time rate is not changing. You are able to use this correction if the full-time rate is not changing, as long as if you retype the same full-time rate, if it's causing the service credit to change. So full-time only correction is just certifying the year when either the full-time rate or the service credit may be changing.
Right. So if you think about it, you got actual earnings, full-time earnings, and service credit. The service credit is just going to be actual earnings divided by full-time earnings.
Right.
So there could be a situation where the full-time earnings are correct, the service credit's not right.
Exactly.
And so you would just retype that same full-time earnings, and it would then recalculate that service credit.
And again, for most state agencies, full-time earnings, because most state agencies don't have a lot of extra pays or extra earnings, for most of your TRSL covered employees, full-time rate will be their annual salary rate.
Right. Yeah. So when you're entering the full-time earnings, you're entering what they would have made for the whole year. Even if they only work part of the year, you're entering the full-time earnings is what they would have made had they worked the whole year.
Right.
Yeah.
So here's an example of when somebody would use a full-time correction. In this instance, this person's on the questionable year report. Their actual earnings were $38,898. Full-time earnings were $39,125. The service credit closed at 77%. It's being questioned because it's the first year and a partial year.
Right.
So in this instance, the employer, researches what they would have earned had they worked the full year. They determined that was $50,155.33. That's what they're going to enter as the full-time earnings. In this case, there was nothing to put in the comment. There was no
Nothing unusual.
Yeah, nothing that would have made us question anything. Nothing. Their salary didn't change during the year. They didn't change positions with the same employer, but they had one rate of pay and they switched to a different rate of pay. This was just straightforward. So there was no reason to put anything else in the comment. So let's talk about some common errors that can occur when somebody's entering a full-time correction. Now, you mentioned that for state agencies, there's not a lot of extras.
Most of them.
Yeah.
But there are a few that do have.
There's some that have overtime. We see this more with K-12 and universities, but state agencies can have this as well.
I think there is one state agency where there is some types of employees that, I forget what they call it, they regularly earn extra pay for whatever duties.
Yeah, somebody gets overtime.
Yes.
That's included. That should be included in the actual earnings and their full-time earnings.
Yes. Right.
One thing that we see a lot is somebody works part of the year. So they start in January. So for us, that would be about half a year.
Yeah, because we're July through June.
Yeah, for lasers, that would be the beginning of the year.
Right.
For us, that's right in the middle.
Right.
So we're expecting around 50% service credit. Sometimes the employer will enter just what they would have made from January to June.
Not
Right.
what they would have made for the whole year.
Right. So by doing that, that would give that person 1 year of service credit for only working half of our year.
Right.
So always make sure that you're entering the full-time earnings for what they would have earned had they started July 1st and worked all the way through June 30th.
Yes.
We talked about being able to enter the same full-time earnings.
Right.
If the full-time earnings are correct, but the service credit is not right.
Right.
We've seen in the past employers thinking they can't enter that same number, so they'll change it by a penny.
And you don't want to do that.
Yeah, you don't have to change it by a penny. You can enter that same amount. If you enter the same amount and you're not supposed to, our program will tell you. You're going to get a message telling you basically you're using the wrong program. Use question bureau certification instead.
Right.
Another thing that we see is somebody has maybe they change positions with the same employer during the year. So at the beginning of the year, they have one rate of pay. In the beginning of the year, they have maybe they got a raise, they have a different rate of pay. So say, for example, at the beginning of the year, their contract is $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
And midway through the year, they get a raise or position change or whatever. And now they're going to make, their rate of pay is $60,000 a year.
Right.
So when the employer goes to certify that, sometimes they'll put 60,000 because that's what it was when the year ended.
Right.
But no, you've got to look, okay, they changed positions during the year. How much did they make in this first position under this rate of pay? How much did they make in the second position under this rate of pay? They got to prorate that and get a kind of a combined blended full-time earnings.
And if you have a situation like that, I want to urge you to reach out to your assigned liaison, Ms. Quincy, and we can assist you with that.
Because the danger is if you put 60,000 as a full-time earnings, well, that person worked the whole year, but they're not going to get a full year service credit because they weren't making that rate of pay until the end of the year.
Right. So they probably did not make 60,000 for the whole year.
Right. We don't want to shortchange anybody on not getting a service credit just because the rate of pay changed.
Right. And if someone's rate of pay changed and they work the entire year, then the actual and the full time are going to equal to give that person a full year.
Right.
That sometimes you'll have to calculate prorate the full-time rate to give them estimated service credit because the person didn't work the full year and they were under two different contracts.
So we mentioned earlier about percent effort, and you said we get to that in a little bit. Well,
right.
Here we are.
Yeah.
The importance of letting us know when somebody's working less than 100% effort.
Right. So if someone is working part-time percent effort, meaning they're working on a schedule every single day of the week, but they're not working the full day, you want to certify them as percent effort, but you also want to select the reason part-time employee. In that case, we will get a work object letting us know. Whenever you're certifying someone, we don't always get a work object, but if you select part-time employee, we will get a work object. Because if someone is working at percent effort, say they're working 5 out of 8 hours a day, I think that was 63%, but they worked every single day of the year, they're going to get 63% service credit for benefit computation, but they're going to get a full year of eligibility credit, which gets them closer to retirement. And we need that certification so that we know to update that service credit for eligibility. We can only do it on our end. And if you're not marking that and things are coming in and they're being certified and we're not reviewing it, that's not giving the employee the amount of correct eligibility credit. They may be missing out on a drop window or retirement eligibility.
Yeah, it's really crucial that if somebody's working less than 100% effort, select part-time as employee and the comment, tell us the percent effort.
Right.
We can take it from there and get everything updated.
Yes.
But one thing we would not want you to do is to select part-time employee if somebody is really full-time, but they only worked a little bit of the year.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
That would be what you would not want to do.
right. For this, we're talking about somebody that's working
Truly part-time.
less
the
than
schedule.
they're working
Less than 8 hours a day, whatever is considered full-time for your agency.
Yep.
Yes.
And just to clarify, part-time, it's every day and it's on a schedule. If somebody's working, and it might not be very common, but if someone is working hourly, just different hours a day, that's not what we're talking about here.
right, they're working on as needed basis.
Right. That's as needed and it's totally different.
And that would be handled better with a comment than a reason field.
Yes.
So when you were going over the question, we were reporting the different ways you can pull it. You mentioned having an option to pull it for years that are, 3 years and less and years that are over 3 years old.
This is why that's important.
So there's an actuarial cost for full-time only corrections for years that are over 3 years old. And that's, by statute, anything, any full-time correction for a year over 3 years old that increases the service credit is really treated as a purchase of service credit by the employer.
Yes.
So you want to kind of go through the slide for them and give them the timeframes and
Right. So right now, we are in fiscal year 2025, and we will be in fiscal year 2025 until June 30th, 2025. So right now, what's considered within 3 years old is any questionable year records that are for fiscal year 2024, 2023, and 2022. So if you are pulling your questionable year report and you're working your questionable years to certify service credit for your TRSL covered employees, if it's fiscal year 22, 23, or 24, you don't have to worry about any potential costs because those are all within 3 years old. If you're going to work a record that is fiscal year 2021 or older, if that service credit increases, that would be considered a service credit purchase actuarial cost by the employer. That's where your employer would incur an additional invoice, an additional charge from our agency. So right now, fiscal year 2022 is within 3 years old, but after June 30th, 2025, it will become more than 3 years old. So I do recommend that all of our agencies pull their questionable years report. If you want to, you can pull it by a single fiscal year if you've got quite a few TRSL covered employees, and find anything for fiscal year 2022 that's still outstanding, that still needs to be certified, and get those certified before June 30th, 2025 to avoid any potential costs to your agency. The way we're going to do those invoices or costs to your agency, any corrections you do, most of them are going to be on a journal entry invoice that's going to total all the corrections you did throughout the year. Usually that invoice will come out usually around October, November timeframe. It's usually 3 pages. It's going to have a cover letter, and it's going to have pages 2 and 3 that's going to detail what employee records you corrected, what fiscal year they were for, how much additional service credit was increased, and what the charge was for each correction. That gives the total for that invoice. If you're going to do any corrections that are over 3 years old and the member has a retirement application on file, except for those entering drop, those invoices are going to come to you instead of a detailed invoice in October or November. Those invoices are going to come within, right after we finalize the benefit, just per record.
Right. They're not going to be mailed a letter for those. Those are just going to be the journal entry process.
Right.
And that'll be available in EMIS that they can pull. Yeah.
Yeah, just keep in mind that even if the service credit goes up, if the full-time rate does not change, it's not a charge.
Yeah, so earlier when we talked about, changing it by a penny.
Right.
That's why you don't want to change it by a penny.
Right.
If what was reported as the full-time truly is correct, the service credit just wasn't right, you can enter that same full-time earnings, and that will not be an actual cost.
Even if it's more than 3 years old, as long as the full-time is not changed.
Yes.
So another program you can use to certify service credit is the questionable year certification program. This one you'll probably use the least of the 3 options,
Right.
because everything has to be right in order to use this one. So the actual earnings, full-time earnings, and service credit all have to be correct in order to use this program. With this, you're not changing any data. It's basically telling us, yeah, what was reported is correct.
And here's why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not trying to change anything. We're just telling you that's already right.
Yes.
Right. You'll use it most often for like first year of employment, last year of employment. Maybe someone has a full year and their earnings decrease more than 5%. If that's the case, you want to use this. If everything's correct, you're going to certify it. But in the comment, let us know why that salary decreased. Maybe they changed positions. And then again, if you're certifying someone that everything's correct, but they are part-time percent effort, you want to select that reason and put the comment of what percent effort they worked.
So this is just an example of somebody using the question year certification to certify a record. In this case, the question year report shows this person had a 4-year service credit. Actual and full-time earnings were both the same at 58,406. It was questionable for being in first year of employment. The employer, researches the record and says, "Oh, that's correct. We don't need to change anything." They would go into that question year certification program. They don't have to enter any, full-time amount. They're just picking a reason. In this case, they put first year of employment, and that's really all the details we would need on this person.
And again, if you're trying to use it, and you should be using full-time only correction, it'll let you know to go and use the other one.
Yeah, it's very limited. You can use that one.
And the third program that you would use to certify service credit is a prior year salary correction. In this case, you're correcting the actual earnings and possibly the full-time earnings as well.
Right.
But definitely the actual earnings. So Kelly, you want to walk them through this process of the screen?
Right, absolutely. So whenever when you get to the end of the year and you're certifying a year and you realize that the actual earnings are not correct, you're wanting to basically change the salary, what that person was actually paid. So you're going to do a prior year correction. And like Jeff said, you're going to have to enter an actual earnings and you're going to have to enter a full-time earnings. You want to make sure that the full-time earnings is a valid full-time earnings. If the person worked half a year and you're changing the actual earnings to 25,000, you want to make sure that the full-time earnings is not also 25,000. You want to put in a valid full-time rate. Once you put in the actual and the full-time, you're going to have to put a reason and or a comment for both the actual and the full-time.
Yeah, so just always keep in mind that service credit formula.
Right.
Actual earnings divided by full-time earnings is going to give us the service credit. So somebody, again, use the example of somebody starting in January.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, that's going to be around 50%. So if you do a prior correction for that person, the actual and full-time earnings should not be the same.
Right.
Because that would give them a full-year service credit for working half the year.
Right.
So just always be aware of when you're entering that full-time earnings, that's going to be a component of the service credit. So always, what if somebody that worked a partial year, have a hire date or a termination date during that year, you kind of look and say, okay, when was that? October, okay, that shouldn't be a full-year service credit. I know my full-time earnings shouldn't be the same.
Right. And a lot of times we'll just see when someone does a prior year correction, they're just duplicating that full-time to match the actual. If that person did not work the full year, then that actual and full-time should not be equal.
Yeah, I think sometimes they're so focused on correcting the actual earnings.
Yeah, they don't realize they have to do the full-time as
They
well.
forget about the full-time and just put that same number. But always make sure that the full-time earnings represents what they would have earned had they worked the full year, July 1st to June 30th.
Right. And again, you have to put a reason or a comment on both sides before the system will let you submit it.
Now, just like there's an actuarial cost for full-time corrections for years over 3 years old, same thing applies to salary corrections.
Right. It's got that same 3-year timeline. Right now we're in 2025. So anything any records that you correct with a prior year correction, if it's fiscal year 2022, 2023, or 2024 right now, those are within 3 years old. If you're going to increase the actual earnings, that should increase the contribution amount. If it's 3 years old or less, you're going to be charged the additional contributions due for both the member portion and the employer portion, plus the interest at the judicial rate. If it's a fiscal year more than 3 years old and you're increasing the actual earnings and that increases the contributions, that's going to be considered an actuarial purchase of service, potentially. We're going to charge you the greater of the actuarial cost or the additional member and contribution interest contributions at the actuarial rate of interest. These are the types of corrections. If it's more than 3 years old, a prior correction that increases the actual earnings, more than 3 years old, these are the ones where if it's going to turn out to be a cost, we will request a $200 calculation fee from your agency. That fee has to be made payable to Teachers Retirement System. That's so that our actuary can do the calculations to compute that cost.
Right, and there's a time frame of once we request that $200 fee, it needs to be it needs to be paid to us within 30 days.
Yes,
If it's not, we're going to have to cancel it. Then they're going to have to resubmit that correction, and then interest will be calculated up until the date that we receive it again.
yes,
So that changes the interest date of, we talk about, member employer contributions plus interest at the actual rate.
Mhm.
It charges interest up until the date we get that correction.
right. And so for any state agencies out there that have any questionable year records on their questionable year report, if you got multiple records out there, the ones that are priority right now, I would say would be fiscal year 2022, because that way, if you fix them now before June 30th, you can avoid any potential charges,
Right.
no
There's,
matter what the correction would be.
yeah, I
Right.
mean, there's still time to correct 2022.
Yes,
That's a good tip for them to pull their reports, isolate 2022. If you need help certifying those, contact us. We're happy to help you. We kind of want to emphasize when we're talking to state agencies that we know a lot of you don't have a lot of dealings with TRSL just because you don't have a lot of people in TRSL.
right,
So, we're here to help and walk you
Right.
through all of our programs.
yes. Now, yeah, any prior year correction they do, any prior year correction that you submit online through our access site, you can find the invoice through the employer's menu, through the journal entry screen, and you'll put in the fiscal year, and it'll show you all prior corrections that were done. If any of them are labeled actuarial journal entry, those are the ones that were over 3 years old that resulted in that $200 calculation fee. That calculation fee was just the calculation fee. That wasn't the total charge. Total charge will be listed on your journal entry.
Right. And if you're doing a correction and you're looking for the journal entry, you may not be able to see it until the next day.
Yeah.
So at this point, we're going to take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the retirement process. And that will be the last topic for the day. So we'll see you in 10 minutes. All right, we're back. Thanks everybody for hanging on with us. I see there's still about, I know 75 of y'all out there. Wasn't sure y'all were all going to make it. But we're at the end now. Jennifer George from the retirement department has joined us, and she's going to talk about the retirement process, kind of what the employer's responsibility is during the retirement process and reporting sick leave and annual leave. So when somebody applies to retire or in a drop, how does this differ from lasers?
Well, there's two ways that the members can apply for retirement with us. One of them is with our actual paper form where they can mail or submit a paper form or go online through member access to apply for retirement with us. They don't necessarily have to coordinate their retirement with their employer. They can retire straight through TRSL, and then we will contact the employer.
Yes, we mentioned how lasers have a little bit of a different process. So what do we encourage members to do?
We still encourage members to contact their employer. They just don't have to go through their employer to retire. So with lasers, they're instructed to contact their agency human resource office to get the application. With us, they can go online and download the application or apply online. But we still encourage the employer to get with the member to get with their employer to coordinate their date of retirement, to work out any insurance issues they may have, and to request their payment of annual leave. We don't coordinate that for them.
And if they don't, go through their agency, we're still going to let that agency know, right?
Right. So anytime a member applies for retirement, we're going to send an acknowledgement letter to the employer, and you should receive that within 2 weeks of the receipt of the date of the application.
So once somebody, once we get that retirement application, kind of kicks off the retirement process, what is the employer's responsibility at that time? What kind of information do we need from them?
So anytime a member wants to enter, drop, or retire, we're going to ask the employer to make sure that all the questionable years are certified. We need all of the sick leave reported, even the sick leave days paid at retirement. We need a Form 11B, which is the agency certification, and this is going to provide the term date and the earnings for that current fiscal year so we can calculate service credit. And then if we see that there's a cap on their final average comp, we may send a cap exemption letter.
So how do we go about requesting that information that we need?
We will review the file close to a member's date of retirement, and if any information is missing, we're going to send you a letter. We usually send a first, second, and a final letter. The first request is going to go out 45 around their date of retirement. If we don't receive a response, we'll send a second request about 45 days later. If we still don't receive the response, we're going to send a final request out. We try and get all the certifications received within 90 days. And by the time it reaches the final request stage, we're going to call you, we're going to email you, we're going to let the member know that there's something missing. But we will send a first, second, and final before we reach out to you.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned that we needed from employers was this Form B, agency certification. So we've talked about, certifying questionable years, prior years that were closed. This is a new thing that we haven't spoken about today. So what is the Form 11B?
So if a Form 11B is going to certify the member's termination date, we're going to request this anytime a member enters, drop, or applies for retirement. It's going to let us know what the member's last day of work was. You're also going to have to provide their full-time earnings as if they would have worked a full year, and we'll be able to calculate service credit. This is for the current year because it's not closed. The form cannot be submitted until all the earnings are reported. So if a member is retiring in the middle of the month, you want to wait until all the money is reported the next month before you submit your Form 11B.
Now, for people that are retiring after drop, there's like an extra wrinkle on that 11B, right?
Right. Since our members don't earn service credit during drop participation, I was going somewhere else with that. So for people in drop, they're not earning service credit. We don't know what their salaries are. So if they work more than 2 years after drop, we need the bottom portion of the 11B submitted. This is going to tell us their last full fiscal year and drop, their actual earnings and their full-time earnings. We're going to use this in the event we have to calculate a final average comp for after drop service credit to see if there is a cap.
Now let's kind of talk about termination date versus retirement date. If somebody's last day of work is, they're going to finish the fiscal year June 30th. They say, I'm retiring on June 30th. What date are they really
They're
retiring?
really retiring on July 1st. So the termination date cannot be the same as the retirement date. The term date is going to be the last day the member worked or they were on official leave. The retirement date is going to be the day the retirement benefit starts. So it's going to be the next day.
Right, so it's not going to be the same day. It's always going to be the next day.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that we also need sick leave certified at retirement. So where can employers go to certify that?
They can go under the updates tab. You can enter the service credit for all the fiscal years, including drop years. And we also need the certification of sick leave days paid at retirement. And both of those are under the updates tab.
So this is what they're going to see when they go to that sick leave program to add an update. What do they enter on this screen?
Right. So if we're going to ask for the months of contract, 9, 10, 11, or 12. It's going to ask you for the number of sick leave days used for that specific fiscal year. You can also enter the annual leave. You'll be able to do it for every year that has an employment history line.
I see a question that came in. Somebody's asking, so for retirement, the full-time earnings is the calendar year or the fiscal year? It's always going to be the fiscal year. So we operate on a fiscal year basis, July 1st to June 30th.
Right.
When we're talking about full-time earnings, that's on a fiscal year basis.
Right.
Now, for state agencies, OSA typically submits an annual sick leave file. That's good for the individual agencies. OSIP is reporting that on their behalf. They may need to certify the current year. OSIP won't submit that till the year closes. So if somebody's retiring during the year, it might be that the agency only has to certify current year. Everything else might already be certified previously through the file that OSIP submits.
Yes.
Now, we spoke about your drop a little bit earlier regarding the 11B, how nothing's reported to us for those drop years. How should an employer go about entering the sick leave days used during drop?
Right. So since there's no sick leave, since there's no service credit, there's no employment history. So you have to, when you're entering the sick leave, you have to actually uncheck the use employment history box. This will allow you to manually enter the beginning and ending dates of drop to enter your sick leave.
Now, the other thing you said we needed regarding sick leave was sick leave days paid at retirement. So where can they go to enter that information?
That is also under the updates tab, and we need this information, even if it's 0 days. Normally it's 25 days, but even if it's 0, we still need it reported. This is an issue sometimes for some of our deferred members who defer their retirement to age 60. There might be a gap in their employment. So we will reach out to the last known employer to ask for sick leave days paid, and it's usually 0, but we need it reported.
So employers can see what's already been reported for somebody for their sick leave, right?
Right. You can always go check out the sick leave page. You'll be able to see what years were reported, the months of contract, the days used, whether it was reported from an employer file or a person actually updated it. And you can also see if the sick leave days paid was reported.
So I was checking to see if there's any other questions regarding the retirement process, and I don't see any. So Kelly, do you want to talk about training that we have available beyond today?
Yeah, exactly. So keep in mind, all of our training came from our Employer Procedures Manual, which is on our website underneath the Employers tab. If you have specific questions for an individual person, you can also reach out to Quincia. Her name and number and email address is also listed under the Employers tab. If you feel like you need some one-on-one training, whether it's via phone, Zoom, or in person, whether you come here or I come out to you, please reach out to me via phone call or email, letting me know that you need some training. I'm more than happy to come out and help and or call you or reach out and work with you in any way possible. We're here for you. We really are. We hope that you reach out to us with any questions. We would much rather work with you than, having to go back later and having to correct things. And
I see a question came through. What if a member worked for 2 different state agencies in the calendar year? I'm assuming that's questioning about sick leave.
Mhm.
OSIP is going to report that to us. Typically, I think they report it all under one.
I think it's what we had decided was when someone works with more than one state agency in a fiscal year, the last state agency that employed that member is going to report all the sick leave. And then the other state agencies need to go in and just report 0 because it's going to be requested. So you just report 0.
Right. And then somebody else commented OSIP might not report for each agency in the fiscal year for sick leave. If not, that's something that your agency might want to ask OSIP about. Yeah, we're receiving the files, but if that's something you might want to, again, coordinate with OSIP to see if they're reporting for your agency or not. I was just, you see me staring over here because we have a screen where I can look at questions. I see any other questions were coming in. I do want to mention that an email will go out tomorrow with a link to a survey. Please take a little bit of time to complete that survey and send it back to us. As I mentioned at the top, we tried out a new format this year for employer training. So please let us know, what you thought about it, especially if you attended, previous years. See how this, compared to previous years. Somebody else is asking, where are additional trainings on the site, employer section? Today's training will be posted probably by next week or so. As far as other trainings on the site, we have a lot of, most of our videos on the site are geared towards members.
Right.
But for additional trainings, really call us and we can see if we can set up something with your agency, whether you come here, we go there, Zoom, phone, whatever. I'm still just going through questions that are coming in.
Where do I find the agency's TRSL contact person? Again, you're going to go to our website. You're going to click on the employers tab under employer liaison. You can type in your employer ID and it's typically come up with Quincia. It'll have her name and her email address.
Will all errors show up on the contribution report except prior year? Yeah, so the contribution exception report, that's for current year. That's going to be, related to that monthly salary file that comes in, things that aren't on the file that we were expecting to be on the file, but things that were on the file that we weren't expecting. So that's just for current year.
Right. If you're looking for a prior year that needs correcting, that's when you pull that questionable year report. For 20 years.
Right. So I want to thank everybody for attending today and hanging on with us. We're here. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. I want to, anytime I deal with state agencies, always emphasize, hey, we recognize that you're used to dealing with lasers. You're not as familiar with us. We're here to help. We can walk you through, how to correct, to clear your exceptions, how to certify service credit. As we're getting really close to the end of the fiscal year, we're going to be putting more of an emphasis on clearing exception reports. So, I'm asking you to make that a priority as well.
And I do want to add, On the employer procedure, the employer site, it does list all the contacts for employer services. If you are having some questions, you're trying to, someone's retiring and you have some questions for a retirement analyst who is working that file, reach out to Quincia and she can direct you to whoever you need to speak to in retirement.
All right. So again, want to thank everybody for coming today. And like I said, we're here. Please don't hesitate to contact us. Thanks.
Thank you.